You ever have one of those days where the smallest thing sets you off? Someone looks at you wrong, cuts you off in traffic, forgets something they said they'd do, and boom, you're pissed. You feel it in your body before you even know what's happening. Your heart races, your tone changes, and suddenly you're in a mood that hijacks your whole day. Sound familiar? Yeah, we've all been there. But what if I told you that anger, this thing we think just happens to us, is not a given? What if it's a habit, a reflex you've been practicing for years without realizing it? This isn't about pretending to be calm, or pushing your feelings down, or walking around like some emotionless robot. This is about learning how to take your power back. Because when you know how anger works, when you know what triggers it, how it builds, and how to stop feeding it, you stop being a puppet for your emotions. You stop reacting, and you start choosing. That's what this is about. Not anger management, anger freedom. Let's break it down. 5 keys, 5 truths. And if you take them seriously, you won't just get better at handling anger. You'll outgrow it. Anger feels automatic. Something happens. Someone cuts you off in traffic. Your partner says something triggering. Your kid spills juice on your laptop. And before you even register the moment, boom, you're boiling, your tone shifts, your heart rate spikes, the day flips, and it feels like you had no choice, like this is just how you're wired. But that's a lie you've been trained to believe. Anger is not something that happens to you. It's something you participate in. And once you understand that, you can take your power back. Let's break this down. Your brain is built for speed, not for accuracy. The moment something disrupts your expectations or threatens your ego, your limbic system, the emotional part of your brain, jumps in first. It launches a chemical cocktail that surges through your body, adrenaline, cortisol, and suddenly, your breathing gets shallow, your fists clench, your jaw tightens. That's your fight response kicking in. And the part of your brain responsible for logical thinking, it goes quiet. That's why anger feels impulsive. It is. But just because the impulse is there doesn't mean you have to obey it. Anger is a signal, not a directive. It's your body saying, hey, something's off here. But what most people do is take that signal and launch it like a missile. They yell, they snap, they shut down, they withdraw, they slam doors or words or both. But here's the truth. Every time you react from anger, you're handing your peace, your power, and your presence to someone else. You're saying, here, you get to decide how I feel today. And if that sounds absurd, good. Because it is. So how do you stop? How do you go from someone who flips out, even occasionally, to someone who simply doesn't get angry? It starts with recognizing that anger isn't mandatory. It's a conditioned habit. Most of us grew up in homes or cultures where anger was normalized, where it was the dominant way people expressed stress, fear, or unmet needs. Maybe you saw your parents slam cabinets or scream in traffic, and you absorbed it as how adults behave. So now, as a grown adult, you're simply repeating a program that was installed decades ago. But like any program, it can be rewritten. You need a pattern interrupt. You need a moment in a moment, right? Between the trigger and the reaction. That's where your power lies, not in denying your anger, not in stuffing it down, but in witnessing it without acting on it. Like this, your heart rate spikes, and instead of yelling, you breathe. Not a deep meditative breath. Just one breath, one beat to say, this isn't about them. This is about me. Because it always is. Your reaction is always about you. It's never about the other person, no matter how awful, rude, or reckless they were. That doesn't mean you excuse them. It means you don't outsource your emotional control. And I know what some of you are thinking. What about injustice? What about real, valid reasons to be angry? Sure, anger can be a catalyst for change. But the anger that changes the world is intentional, not impulsive. It's anger that's been alchemized into clarity, not sprayed like a fire hose onto everyone nearby. What we're talking about here is the everyday anger, the little fires that torch our peace, the snarky emails, the slammed doors, the social media nonsense, the 100 tiny cuts that we let bleed us dry because we think our reaction is justified. But if it costs your peace, it's not justified. It's expensive. The truth is, anger is easy. It's lazy. It's what happens when we don't pause long enough to feel what's really going on. And most of the time, under anger is fear, or sadness, or disappointment. But those emotions are quieter, softer, and harder to sit with. Anger, it's loud. It makes us feel powerful when we actually feel powerless. So we choose it, not because it's helpful, but because it masks the truth. But once you see that really see it, you start to feel the pause. You start to see the space between stimulus and response. And in that space, you get to choose again. You get to choose peace over pride, stillness over shouting, presence over reaction. That's where the real strength is, not in the explosion, but in the refusal to light the fuse. Before your brain catches up to what's happening, your body is already speaking to you. That tightness in your chest, the shallow breath, the clench in your jaw, the heat rising in your neck. These aren't random discomforts. They're the early warning signs that anger is creeping in, and most people miss them. Not because the signals aren't clear, but because we've trained ourselves to ignore them. Or worse, we think they're normal, but they're not. They're your body's way of flashing red lights and sirens saying, something is wrong, and you're about to react in a way that doesn't serve you. Your body is always faster than your thoughts. It's not even close. Emotions originate in the body, and by the time you think, I'm getting angry, your nervous system has already shifted gears. You've entered a physiological state where your fight or flight reflex is ready to take over. And once you're in that state, your ability to think rationally is compromised, not diminished, not slightly impaired, compromised. Which means if you wait until your mind catches up to manage your emotions, it's already too late. That's why learning to tune into your body is essential, not optional. If you want to stop anger before it hijacks you, start noticing your tells. Everyone has them. Some people feel pressure in their temples. Others get jittery hands. Some feel their shoulders rise toward their ears. These signals are your personal anger radar, and they're unique to you. But you'll never notice them if you're only focused outward, blaming traffic, blaming your partner, blaming the delay, blaming the tone of a text. The key is to shift the focus inward. What's going on in me right now? Where do I feel that tension? When did it start? What was the moment I crossed from calm to triggered? This is not about being soft or passive. This is about reclaiming control. When you know what your body is doing, you know what your emotions are about to do. You don't have to wait until you're yelling, slamming, or stewing in silence to notice something's off. You can catch it in the first few seconds and pivot. That pivot might look like walking out of the room. It might be unclenching your hands and shaking them out. It might be exhaling, loudly, slowly, audibly. It might just be saying in your mind, this is a moment. It will pass. I don't need to react. Because the real problem is not that we feel anger. It's that we feel it rising, and then we let it take the wheel. Imagine if you let every physical impulse lead your life. Every time your stomach growled, you grabbed food. Every time you yawned, you fell asleep. We've learned to regulate those urges. But anger, most people give it the keys and say, drive. And then we wonder why our relationships are strained, our days feel chaotic, and our energy is drained. The truth is, our bodies are giving us all the data we need to stop this early, but we have to start listening. You might think this kind of awareness takes years to build. It doesn't. It takes intention. Just start with one check-in per day. One moment where you stop and scan your body, ask, where's the tension? What's tight, what's buzzing or aching or stirring, and then do nothing about it except notice. That noticing is everything, because the more fluent you get in your body's language, the sooner you catch the signals and the less often you explode. Anger doesn't start with the shouting. It starts in the silence of your nervous system. It starts when you're still pretending everything is fine, but your body knows it's not. Your shoulders are screaming for relief. Your jaw is begging you to relax. Your breath is telling you to slow down. And if you don't hear it early, it'll get louder. Not with words, but with actions you'll regret. You don't need to be perfect at this. You just need to be curious about yourself, about your patterns, about what your body is trying to protect you from. Because that's what's really happening. Your body isn't trying to hurt you with anger. It's trying to protect you from feeling powerless, unheard, dismissed, hurt. It's trying to armor you up, but armor isn't strength. Awareness is, presence is, and it starts not in your thoughts, but in your skin, your breath, your heartbeat. The sooner you learn to read them, the less often you'll have to clean up the mess anger leaves behind. Most people live in reaction mode. Something happens and boom, they respond. Without thinking, without pausing, without considering whether the reaction is useful, necessary, or even accurate. That's the default setting for most of us, because that's what we've practiced the most. We've rehearsed reactions thousands of times. We've practiced snapping back when criticized, rolling our eyes when annoyed, escalating when provoked. It's a muscle memory built over years. But if you want to stop getting angry, you don't need more control. You need a new default, and that default is reflection. Reflection doesn't mean sitting in a quiet room journaling for hours. It means creating space, just a few seconds, enough to ask, what's really going on here? That question, asked in the middle of a trigger, changes everything. Because the truth is, what you're reacting to isn't always what's actually happening. Someone makes a comment, and your brain immediately assigns tone, intention, and meaning. And you react, not to what was said, but to what you think it meant. That's where most anger lives, in that gap between reality and interpretation. To shift from reacting to reflecting, you need to start recognizing that not every moment requires your input. Not every irritation demands a response. Not every tone needs to be matched. Most of what triggers you isn't personal, it's habitual. Someone criticizes your work, old habit. Defend yourself immediately. New habit, breathe, say nothing for a second, and decide if this feedback is useful or just noise. Someone cuts you off in traffic. Old habit, yell, flip them off, carry the stress for the next 10 minutes. New habit, notice the surge, let it pass, remind yourself they're not thinking about you at all. They're just rushing, like you've done before. This shift isn't easy at first, because it feels unnatural. It feels like you're holding back or being fake. But it's not fake to pause. It's not fake to think before you speak. It's not fake to choose peace over ego. It's maturity. It's power. Real power is quiet. It's calm, it's measured, it doesn't need to dominate or retaliate. It knows that most triggers aren't about this moment. They're echoes from old ones. That snippy comment from your coworker might remind you of being dismissed in childhood. That sarcastic tone from your partner might hit an old bruise you haven't dealt with. Reflection gives you the space to see that. Reaction never does. One of the most powerful tools to build this new default is a phrase. Something short, automatic, and grounding. It could be as simple as, wait, just that. Say it in your head the moment you feel the flare. Wait, that word can buy you a second, and in that second you break the chain. You shift from autopilot to awareness. And once you've done that, even once, you're not the same, because now you know you have a choice. That's the secret nobody tells you. Anger feels like it owns you, but you can interrupt it. You don't need to solve it or explain it in the moment. You just need to pause it. You'll still feel it rise. The goal isn't to eliminate the emotion. It's to change the outcome. When you stop reacting and start reflecting, you get to own your responses. You choose your tone, your words, your posture. You communicate from a place of stability, not survival. That's when people start listening. That's when you start being heard. Because nobody hears the message when it's wrapped in fire. But when you speak from calm, from presence, from reflection, you become impossible to ignore. Building this new default takes repetition. You won't get it right every time. You'll still react. You'll still snap. But each time you catch yourself, each time you pause even for a moment, you're rewiring your brain. You're teaching your nervous system that it's safe to slow down, safe to think, safe to be quiet, and over time, you'll notice the space gets bigger. The pause gets longer, the anger loses its grip, not because it disappears, but because it no longer dictates your actions. This is how you unlearn rage, not by suppressing it, not by pretending it's not there, but by stepping off the track it's used to running. You replace the knee jerk with a conscious choice. You trade volatility for vision. You reflect even when you want to react, especially when you want to react. And eventually, reflection stops being a skill you force and becomes the way you live. Anger rarely explodes out of nowhere. It builds slowly, quietly, like pressure in a valve. One moment doesn't set you off, it's the sixth, the seventh, the final drop that tips the cup. You didn't get angry because the dish was left in the sink. You got angry because it followed a dozen other moments you didn't interrupt. That's where the real work is, in the micro moments, the tiny points in your day where you could pivot but don't. The invisible spaces that determine whether you spiral into a reaction or shift toward calm. Micro moments are seconds, not minutes. They're the pause between your kid asking for something for the 10th time and you snapping. The moment when you read a passive-aggressive message and your body tenses up. That breath you hold before walking into a stressful meeting. These are the moments that seem insignificant, but they hold everything. Because how you respond in those seconds determines the tone of your next hour or your next day. And most people rush right past them. Too busy, too tired, too used to letting frustration accumulate. Interrupting an emotional spiral doesn't require a big ritual. You don't need to go meditate or take a walk every time someone annoys you. You just need a wedge, a single action or thought to break the pattern. That could be as small as standing up, walking to the bathroom, taking one sip of water, literally one, because in that second, you disrupt the loop your brain was about to run. You say to your nervous system, hold on, we're not doing this the same way this time. And even if that pause is short, it's enough to buy you clarity. People think anger control is about endurance, gritting your teeth and trying not to explode. It's not, it's about early intervention. The earlier you catch the spiral, the easier it is to stop. Think of your anger like a snowball rolling downhill. If you try to stop it when it's already massive and flying, you're getting crushed. But if you catch it when it's a handful of flakes, you can brush it off. That's what micro moments give you, the chance to catch the snowball before it becomes a wrecking ball. You can train yourself to spot these moments by linking them to physical cues. Tension in your shoulders, that's a micro moment. Clenching your jaw, micro moment. Repeating a story in your head about what someone did and how unfair it was. That's a spiral trying to start. Stop right there. Don't analyze it. Don't argue with it. Just notice it. That act alone breaks the cycle. Awareness is the interruption. One of the best ways to strengthen this practice is through naming. Give the moment a label. Say, I feel the pull, or this is a flare, or even just pause, short, simple, internal. That label separates you from the anger. It turns you from the reactor into the observer, and that shift in perspective, that's the crack where peace gets in. You're no longer in the anger. You're watching it. That's power. That's where change begins. Most spirals come from accumulated moments you didn't interrupt. The sideways comment from a coworker. The missed text, the loud chewing. Each one is small but stacked together. They create an emotional backlog. And when your system is backed up, the smallest disruption can feel enormous. You think you're reacting to one thing, but really, you're reacting to everything you didn't deal with earlier. Micro moments let you stay current. They let you process and pivot in real time, so you don't carry unspoken resentment or fatigue into the next interaction. You won't catch everyone. That's fine. You're not aiming for perfection. You're aiming for pattern disruption. You're looking for 1 second to not say what you usually say, 1 beat to unclench your fists, 1 breath to not send that angry text. That's enough to slow the spiral. And if you slow it today, you make it easier to stop it tomorrow, because these moments compound. Every time you choose calm, you reinforce the neural pathway that says, we don't have to go there anymore. That's how regulation is built. One micro moment at a time. You already know when you're starting to slip. You feel it, the internal speed up, the irritation that creeps in, the need to be right, to retaliate, to release. That's your cue. Not to push it down, but to step out. One action, one breath, one shift in posture. That's your exit ramp. You don't need a big strategy. You need a second, just one. And if you start looking for them, you'll see they're everywhere. Most people misunderstand boundaries. They think boundaries are about other people, what they can or can't do, what's allowed, what's acceptable, but that's not it. Boundaries aren't fences you build around other people. They're standards you set for yourself. They're not rules to control someone else's behavior. They're commitments to protect your own peace. When you truly understand that, your relationship with anger changes. Because a lot of your anger isn't actually about what someone else did. It's about what you allowed to happen without speaking up. It's not the boundary they crossed. It's the boundary you never enforced. When you get angry, what you're often feeling is resentment. And resentment is a signal. It means something important has been overlooked, usually by you. You didn't say no. You didn't express what you needed. You didn't protect your time, your energy, your emotional bandwidth, and now you're mad, not just at them, but at yourself. But instead of looking inward and adjusting the boundary, you lash outward. You raise your voice, you shut down, you stew, you blame. That's what happens when boundaries are assumed instead of expressed. Here's the thing. People can't honor a boundary you never clearly set. And they especially can't honor one you keep moving. If your tone changes every time someone asks for a favor, but you never say no, that's not a boundary. That's a boiling point waiting to happen. And every time you let something slide to avoid conflict, what you're actually doing is delaying the conflict. You're not avoiding tension, you're storing it. And eventually, that storage overflows in the form of anger, explosive or quiet, but always corrosive. The strongest boundaries are silent. They don't need to be loud or dramatic. They don't need to come with ultimatums. They look like walking away instead of arguing, declining without defending, changing the subject, saying that doesn't work for me, without apology. That's it. That's strength, because a real boundary doesn't punish, it protects. It doesn't demand compliance from others. It demands consistency from you. This is where people get stuck. They think if someone keeps violating a boundary, it means the other person is disrespectful. Sometimes that's true, but more often it means you haven't been consistent. You draw the line, then move it when things get uncomfortable. You say you won't tolerate something, then tolerate it to keep the peace. But that's not peace. That's performance, and it breeds anger. Deep, subtle, chronic anger. The kind that builds silently over time and then explodes in ways that feel out of proportion. To stop getting angry, you have to take ownership of your boundaries. You have to stop waiting for people to change and start changing the way you engage. That might mean being more direct. It might mean saying things that feel awkward at first. It might mean disappointing people. But every time you set and keep a boundary, you're telling yourself, I matter. And that message rewires everything. It builds confidence, clarity, and calm. Because when your boundaries are solid, your anger doesn't have to do the talking. You don't need to explain your boundaries to everyone. You don't need a long justification. Boundaries are not about being understood. They're about being clear, and clarity doesn't always come with agreement. Some people will resist. Some will push back. Let them, that's their work. Your work is to stay grounded, to stop expecting others to manage your emotions, to stop outsourcing your emotional safety to people who may not be equipped or interested in providing it. It's your job to protect your peace, not your bosses, not your friends, not your partners, yours. And once you take that seriously, everything changes. You stop overextending. You stop swallowing your frustration. You stop letting things slide that chip away at your sanity, because you realize the anger you keep feeling. It's just your system screaming for boundaries you keep avoiding. Boundaries don't create distance. They create space for respect, for truth, for self-trust. And when you hold them with clarity, you don't need anger to defend them. You don't need rage to express what could have been stated calmly weeks ago. You don't need emotional exhaustion to justify saying no. You simply live from a place of alignment, not because others finally got it, but because you finally did.